So what do you want to change in the system in which you work, and maybe say a bit about the system that you feel you work in?
I think the system that I have at least emerged from is the education system, but I realise more and more that I'm trying to bridge to the education system and also thinking about employment, about which I don't know very much. So this is an interesting system, like trying to change something about which we're just learning at the same time is an interesting process. So what I'm looking at is finding ways of supporting anyone to do what they want to do when they leave education and they want to move into the world of work. And at the moment, the systems seem to exist to support those who tend to have more opportunities, come from higher classes in the UK. And I want to try and level that playing field. And I don't think that it's a zero-sum game. I think some people argue that if you allow those from different backgrounds to come and take opportunities, then the opportunities won't exist for others, which I disagree with. So yeah, it's trying to find a bridge between holes in the education system and holes in the employment system.
And in some ways you've touched on it, but can you just talk in a bit more detail maybe about your theory of change? Like how do you think change will happen in those worlds coming together?
It's a theory of change that is constantly re-articulated, and so it's not a kind of firm theory, I guess. It's an emerging idea. And I guess it's just taking everything back to basics. That the way we can enable young people to flourish and fulfill their potential, whether that's in school or in work, is by helping them to develop the key character strengths and soft skills that are needed to succeed. So our theory of change, as it stands, is that if you support young people develop those strengths and skills proactively, then anybody can be in a better position to understand what they want to do and to achieve that.
And how do you think that links to the employment stuff? I understand. I know that's like you're just starting to think about that, but like, what's your sort of hunch about that at the moment?
Well, it's part hunch and part based on a little bit of the research that I've done, which is that actually it's strengths like grit or resilience or mettle, I guess in my parlance, that are crucial in business, just as they are in the rest of life. And actually it's those sorts of things that employers look for. And although academic background and achievements mean something, the ones who are really the talent that employers tend to want are often the young people who shine beyond the confines of a school curriculum. So it's helping develop a language that's understood by both young people and employers and schools or other organisations working with young people, trying to find that commonality. And that's a really, really hard thing to do right now. Not just the kind of lexicon, but then also it's a bit, I guess, I was about to do like a tech analogy, but I'm not good enough. I was about to talk about an API, but I'm not clever enough to do that. It's trying to get those different people who are all kind of feeling the same thing to actually explicitly talk about it. I feel like in the work that I'm interested in, all these strengths and skills development, so that they're not based around hard skills or academic subjects, there's a lot of kind of general consensus that they're important, but there's nothing deeper than that, where people can understand and sort of talk clearly with each other.
Because you just use the word emergence and that, or emerging emergence, and I get what you mean by that, which in sometimes means that people don't want to be pinned down to saying what their vision is. Like, I'm talking too much, but we'll cut this out. Like people like Rachel and Ella, in terms of their labs, they almost don't ever define the vision, because that goes against the theory of complexity that they're working with, or something like that. But our question is, like, how important is it to you to articulate the vision of what you're working towards or what you're doing, and how do you do that?
I think for me, it was initially really important to do that because I needed to be able to articulate what I was trying to do, even though it wasn't clear and it kept changing. And I still haven't nailed down, I haven't got my pithy one-liner yet. It's not like it's not like a flashlight app where the vision is for everybody to be able to see in the dark. It is more complicated than that. So it was initially really important. In some ways, that process of re-articulating and re-trying to define what the vision is now what I think of as important. And particularly now that I'm in a place where I'm working with other people on a day-to-day basis within my organisation, to then articulate a shared vision together, something that we're all collectively striving towards, I think is really vital. So it's kind of an interesting sort of liminal period for me right now, moving away from what I was sort of driving forward on my own to stepping back and trying to work with others to come up with a shared vision. There's a kind of meta importance in that process, I think, for me and for the team I'm working with.
Who are your allies and fellow travellers?
I guess right now the people that I'm kind of working with day to day, which is a small but growing group, which is great. Because it's working, there were quite a few that are sort of needed. So types of people or organisations. Initially, it was finding other people who were striking out on their own, so others in the youth sector space or in the social enterprise space, which I still reluctantly refer to myself in that way. So anybody just sort of trying to do something a bit different, that has been great, and it definitely feels like kind of fellow travellers. In terms of allies, finding others working towards similar visions, which I guess is where the vision sort of comes back a bit, to be able to see where there's consensus and sort of opportunities to collaborate and complement each other's work. So those would be organisations like Liberty, for example, that I really like, or a youth centre like the Winch, to try and support each other and kind of push ideas forward. And then increasingly we've been doing more and more tech stuff, so really getting allies in that scene where I can learn that knowledge has been crucial. And then finally in the business sector, and that's the one that I've gone to last, but probably is the most important. I think my background in coming from education and charity is the sort of thing that I think about the least, and actually it's the thing that sort of can glue everything together and turn it into a well-oiled machine, to have two metaphors mixed up in one idea.
And what are the sort of strategies and tactics that you've used in terms of getting, from when you started to where you are now?
In terms of building support? Or
more generally, like what have been your tactics in terms of keeping going, in terms of connecting with others, in terms of having an impact?
That's a really good question, and one, I guess the obvious response is that there isn't like a very clear game plan in my head in terms of working with others to make something happen. Although I've gone through the strategizing and the business planning, and again, just like the vision coming up withing, I think it's a really good process, but actually you then sort of just keep shifting and things keep changing. So I think just staying kind of alive and alert, like taking opportunities was definitely a tactic. Like any opportunity to meet somebody or to do something, I would try and run with it. It is a tactic that I'm now changing because I have to be more mindful of the ones that I do pick, and really trying to focus a strategy. I guess another tactic has just been to try everything and just kind of hack things together and just see what we can do and see what sticks and what doesn't. But again, I now feel like I'm coming to a period where I've got to then go back and decide what to take forward and what to leave. And then just trying, and I guess a kind of overriding tactic or strategy, one to do with other people that we're working with, is around making sure what we're doing is complementary. I'm not competitive by nature, and this is a space which is like there's lots of room for everybody. So how can we make sure that we support what other people are doing rather than be kind of hard-hitting, pit bully competitors? I guess one thing that I've done within Spark of Metal is to come up with 3 tenets, 3 approaches to everything we do, which I suppose could be considered as tactics or strategies. And one is that we co-create everything with young people. So more generally, always co-creating with the people that we're wanting to change things for or with. 2, getting a lot of different brains in. So for us, that's doing a lot of intergenerational work and getting older-ish or young-ish people to work with young. And 3, to really Robin Hood technology. So try and see what people's digital habits are and how we can make them for the good rather than for the inane, I guess. And maybe sometimes the inane too.
And I remember in the Nominat thing that we did you talked about a distinction between social entrepreneurs and like social tech.
Yeah.
And I'm interested, can you just sort of say a bit more about that and how you think, do you have any opinion or view around how one or the other links more to achieving sort of systemic change rather than, I don't know, and there might not be, that's not in our questions, that's me just...
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So the systemic change thing, I guess if you get social tech right, and that is a big if, then the possibilities for systemic change are just so exciting. Although that's maybe light touch rather than kind of deep impact. But that's a really interesting, that's something I love exploring. How can you then leverage tech to then do offline things as well? Or human things too. In terms of the difference, I think that it's just 2 different worlds and 2 different approaches, and also, again, like the vocabulary, the jargon that comes along with being an entrepreneur and then a social entrepreneur, and that there's, I think in the UK in general, that everything is just quite cliquey. So there's a whole kind of little world around social entrepreneurship that is in many ways kind of very exciting and collaborative and supportive. But you definitely kind of have to find your way in. And once you're there, you have to kind of, get up to speed quite quickly. And then you see who the kind of main players are. And ditto in the tech scene. And the tech scene is increasingly, there's now more sort of entryways in sort of socially oriented stuff. But there, it's a place where, profit, for the most part, is primary. So there are different incentives and motives. And I think just learning the language and learning the approaches and learning the habits and routines of both those 2 different sorts of systems, they're not mutually exclusive, but they do feel like very different worlds. And one feels younger, and one feels older too. I feel like sort of, but I don't, that's all I can sort of fathom right now.
So we move on to the more personal section now. So how do you describe your work when you're not to appear in this space, but to your family, your friends? How do you talk about it?
Does everybody who gets this question just laugh because everybody's nobody? And for the first time, we've now got this physical space, and I feel like I'm not sort of emperor's new clothes about doing things which nobody can really pocket. And sort of pin down. So I say that I run a small youth organisation that tries to support marginalised young people succeed in work and life. And I just don't go into any more detail than that. Sometimes I say that we try and use tech to sort of make things happen. But I now try and keep it as vague as possible, because when I start deep diving in, then eyes glaze over.
So just to give us a bit more of a sense of what you do actually do, then can you give us like a week, a day, like a week in the life of Eugénie? Like what kinds of things might you be doing day to day?
Yeah, with a work-wise. So day to day, things have changed in the last couple of weeks because we now have an office space there, and I now have a growing team of 2 full-time and 2 part-time people working with me. So Mondays is a day where we have a team meeting where we're trying to figure out how to make those run most effectively and just sort of share what's happened and sort of set out what we want to do and see where we can help each other. And then we will meet possibly 1 or 2 of us with other potential partners or organisations who are hoping to do things together with, or also then I'm spending a lot of time at the moment then supporting, help set up goals and outcomes for the different team members. So Mondays we tend to all be together, and then for the rest of the weeks we can be working remotely. So I will meet with, it's such a great question, what do I do all day? It's like that Richard Scarry book. Have you seen it, that kid's book? Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. If it was today, it would just be like every page would just be people going like this on the computer and occasionally drinking over coffee. My time is broken up between strategizing at the moment, 2 key things, and then looking for funding. So that might be writing funding or going to meet with potential funders or investors. And then also, doing a lot of the strategy stuff right now. So a lot of my time is actually spent either sort of talking and building relationships with other people, or just sitting by myself and writing furiously and occasionally doodling. And some of that being spent on a train, and quite a lot of that being spent in coffee shops.
But now you've got your new office.
But now I've got a new office, that does change everything, yeah. And we've been doing a lot of stuff, and also thinking about the organisation and how it will work, and where we've got strengths and weaknesses, and what sort of team we need to fill to make it really strong and sort of carry forward. So I think it's probably a slightly unusual time, but then again, I guess every month feels like a slightly unusual time. So,
what in the sort of work that Sparkle Metal's doing? What's your relationship with organisations? What do you see the role of, in terms of you, Sparkle Metal, and then like institutions or organisations in the kind of system you're working in?
Because we are a kind of self-proclaimed small potato, in terms of it's a small team, just sort of trying out little things. I think our relationship with more firmly established organisations like schools or youth charities or others working with young people is to be able to provide sort of insight and agility into ideas that they want to test out or that we could bring to them. The pithy sentence that I say about what we want to do ultimately at the moment is that we want to be the global heavy hitters for the soft stuff. So we want to be the specialists in supporting both young people themselves and people working with them, be they employers or schools or whoever, understand how they can best develop young people's character strengths and soft skills. So if we can come in and do that, and if we can also give some of the more established institutions ideas into how to use tech and how to get young people to design programs or run workshops, etc., then we're really excited about that too. So that tends to be where we work well. So we sort of confess that we're small and see where we can kind of mutually support each other.
Yeah, can you point to an example of systems change in action?
I think this pause is saying a lot, isn't it? Nothing that's permanent. I've just been thinking about the riot cleanup stuff that happened, because there's an American equivalent happening right now, the shutdown cleanup over in the States. And I think problem about systems change is that it's quite easy to feel like you're being disruptive and doing something different in small isolated instances. To bring about kind of successful change actually involves like creating kind of bulky, complicated, heavy things, and that's not what some little organisation like Spark and Metal is in any way good at, because as I said, we're like the teeniest, tiniest potato. I mean, but even if you look at sort of from a policy level about trying to put sort of different changes in place, so many of them just don't work. So I'm totally stumped for an answer to that question. I'd love to know what other people have said, so I'd be inspired by it. But and I think it's also a really long-term game. One very general thing that has sort of changed everything, obviously, is technology as a whole. I think, and especially in the last 20, 25 years. And I think people are just catching up to that, and that's sort of changed all systems fundamentally. But it's very hard for me to pin down something sort of sector-specific or anything else.
Is that right? I'm trying to think what other people have said. I think Daniel and Jenny both talked about participant examples.
Yeah.
What for examples?
Yeah. Anyway.
No one's really come up with anything.
Pardon?
No one's really thought of anything
Haven't
too
they?
much now.
Okay.
I mean, what does that say as well? But that's interesting that everybody, like, that they say that about sort of entrepreneurs or whoever, like, want to do this. Like, there's just, like, this blind, rigid optimism that even though there's a blank answer to that question, you're still going to, like, keep trying to do something, see what sticks.
Say with India, it's happening. It's not like it might happen, we hope it happens. India says it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But most people say two things. They say, name a successful example, they go, don't know any.
Yeah.
They also say that it takes 5 years for any social thing to get into action. So I think
And
it's
also,
still birth years.
yeah, and also I think,
Doing it.
in the UK, just as it would be in the US or any other sort of fairly stable country, I mean, the economic crisis spurred on some system change, I think, out of which many things have happened. Spark and Metal being my response to cuts to children's services and young people's services. And I think others are sort of responding like that. But so I think there is something around, like, there being time for things to happen. But also, actually, even though we're not in the most economically stable time, I mean, really, like, life isn't all that bad in the UK. But so in a country where it's obviously a lot more volatile, then I think systemic change is brought about, but it's brought about in, like, a genuinely disruptive rather than, like, hipster disruptive way, with, like, war. So I think that, yeah, I mean, also how much that, people want to be disruptive, but how, but not like, but only in the kind of latte type way. Sometimes. You can edit that bit out, please.
Well, no, I might put it in. No, I won't put that. Well, I don't know.
It'd be interesting to see what other people say.
Yeah. What did Nick say this morning?
About successful examples.
Oh, well, I guess actually, the ones that have said stuff, it's just been their own projects. So, anyway.
For a little while, but only a short time, paying for plastic bags, that made a difference, but not in the long term, in terms of sustainability stuff. Anyway, sorry.
And then alongside that, what also keeps you going?
The thing that keeps me going is actually when I make connections for young people to other professionals that excite them, and it's a two-way kind of benefit. So actually, when we have the face-to-face events where we get young people and professionals to kind of get together, and everyone gets excited because they're meeting and interacting with people they would never otherwise normally talk to, that is the thing that I love best in the world, and what sort of totally drives everything that I do forward. So that's kind of what keeps me going, and also just a dogged kind of persistence and determination that I'm like just going to keep going at it till we do kind of something. And that I've started it, so I'm just going to damn well finish it. So in terms of spark and metal, like I'm just sort of proving and testing my own metal constantly right now. In terms of inspiration, I've always find this a really, really hard question to think about. Not because I'm not inspired, and I'm kind of motivated and feel supported by a whole host of different people, from you, Cassie, through to other people I've met in the last 2 years through my work, including people like Tom at Makerversity and others, who are all kind of striking out and doing something different. So that kind of peer group I feel really supported by. It's really hard for me. I haven't nailed down who I'm most inspired by, because I know that ultimately I don't want to be associated in the long term with... I don't want Spark and Metal in the long term to be associated with me. Like, I don't want to be the Richard Branson. Though in many ways I admire Camilla Batman of Kids Company. I'm sorry that I can't say her last name. My world is not just my work, and I want Spark Metal to be bigger and greater than anything I could ever have imagined. So trying to find an inspiration figure who has sort of tried to drive change forward, but not then kind of claim it for their own. They're quite hard to rustle up, I guess, deliberately. That's kind of how they want it to be. Oh, maybe like Mr. Higgs of the Higgs particle, who hid this week. Maybe he's my hero. I would love to be able to understand how atoms fit together. That's my crummy answer.
No, that's a good answer. And what would you like us to do with this content?
Not play it back to me.
Do you trusting us with it?
It would be so interesting to hear other people's responses. So making it something searchable, like a library, but also perhaps to then inspire, both being able to kind of look at it online, but also to be able to be conversation start. I would be really interested in seeing what trends would emerge and actually trying to set up a conversation to discuss those in more detail. I think it's really interesting being asked questions and having sort of just coming up with ideas on the spot, but then on further reflection, then where that would go, and thinking a little bit more deeply and collaboratively with others. I'd be really interested in that too.
Thank you. Thank you. In my life. Thank you.
No, not at all.